Our literary concept for today is translation. Translation is almost as old as writing itself. We usually date the Epic of Gilgamesh, a Sumerian work, to about 4,000 years ago. You can find instances of that epic being translated into Southwest Asian languages from about 3,000 years ago. So we've been translating for a long time as humans. Our culture has deep myths about the power of language to unite and divide. So if you think about the biblical story of the Tower of Babel, moving from one language to another often raises concerns. So why do we have to worry about translation? Well, any of you who speak two languages probably know that there are sometimes meanings available in one language that just can't quite be expressed in another. There's always the chance of something being lost in translation. So in Italian they say traduttore, traditore, which means translator, traitor. So the two words are almost the same, and they're, to translate somebody is to betray them. However, as an historical practice, there are also times when translation has gotten languages to share words. The translator always has the choice of introducing a foreign word into the text and explaining it. So translation can be a force for cultural hybridity, which is going to be a concern for us as we read this story whose backdrop is cultural difference. And that's a good concept to hold on to for now, too, because when we talk about Marquez this week, we'll also be talking a lot about what happens when cultures fuse, or don't fuse, but have to mix. So, as an overall concept, translation is an important force in cultural mixing, understanding, and sometimes fruitful misunderstanding. In the more specific case of this text, I want to talk about the translation of the title and the word history or etymology behind it. In English, we call this story The Guest. That pretty clearly refers to the Arab prisoner in the story. It might seem ironic to call a prisoner a guest. Maybe you've heard people jokingly say that they've been guests of the state to mean they spent time in jail. But you'll see that Daru treats the unnamed man well, so maybe he is a guest. Anyway, in French, Camus titled the story L'Hôte, which can be translated as either the guest or the host. And in fact, the translator asked him which one to go with, and Camus said, okay, go with the guest, but he wasn't pleased that it didn't have, the word in English didn't have that split. I want you to think about that fruitful ambiguity as you read the text, that ambiguity between guest and host. This is an instance where going back to the original language behind the translation reveals a meaning that's lost in translation. So that's our first step, is seeing that in French there were two meanings, in English, one. From here we can take another step. As a reader of literature, or simply as a user of language, it's imperative to be aware that every word we use has a history. There's an accretion of meanings across time as words move from language to language. You're probably familiar with the idea of language families. Basically, linguists have figured out that different languages are related to one another in different ways. For instance, Spanish, French, and Italian are all called daughter languages of Latin. You may have heard them called Romance languages. It's not because they're better for love, it's because of their connection to the Roman people. So we've moved kind of laterally from the English translation back to the French word l'hôte. Now we need to move kind of vertically back into the past to see what connotations and connections are buried in this word. So the word goes back to the Latin hospit, which you will probably know from some English or Spanish words like hospitality or hospital. And that Latin root meant both host and guest, so that ambiguity is there from way back. It's also connected with the development of the Latin hostis, which first meant stranger and then enemy. So it may seem strange that the same word could mean guest and host, and stranger and enemy, but one etymologist described it this way, so here's a quote. Someone coming from afar could be a friend or an enemy. Stranger covers both situations. With time, different languages generalized one or the other sense, so that guest vacillated between a person who is friendly and welcome and a dangerous invader. And that's the end of the quote. So we have all these different meanings coming together. There's one more wrinkle to add here. There's not some completely explained development linking the Latin hostus to the host, as in the consecrated wafer that's used in communion. That word in Latin means sacrificial victim. Now, our research into the etymology of this word has suggested, first of all, an ambivalence about the role of host and guest. Is Daru a guest in Algeria? Is his Arab prisoner his guest? Who's hosting whom? The research also suggests that he might be a stranger or even an enemy. Look out as you're reading for moments when the prisoner is dehumanized. You might start with the fact that he lacks a name. One further possibility. Is the prisoner a sacrifice? Or maybe someone or something else is going to be sacrificed? Drilling down on this one word from the title can open many possibilities.